Yo, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Welcome back to another video. Today we're talking about what the best deck to pick for Worlds could be. Again, this is gonna be a lot of just my opinion. We kind of started this conversation in yesterday's video where we talked about all the different first place lists from all the different nationals. So yeah, I mean, this is more of a conversation for me and you. I don't expect the Worlds competitors to really be looking into this too deeply, but I thought it was kind of a cool topic to go over because there is a lot of data to pull from and a lot of opinions and talking points to go through here. So if you guys are new here, make sure to subscribe, hit that bell so you don't miss a video. And if you guys want to help support the channel, there are many ways to do so down in the description. But if you guys want to step your game up competitively, consider checking out the Patreon. You can read the articles that I post there, or you can inquire about some coaching if you do really want to step your game up for the next competitive season. Anyways, we'll get started. So what we're going to do is talk about all the decks that were able to qualify for Worlds and their viability as, world premier picks, right? So firstly, we will talk about Cell Surge. I do think Cell Surge is a really solid pick for Worlds. I think it's just a really hard deck to beat in game one. Like, even if you're maining Deborah's and Sand Instincts, I still think it's a tough deck to beat in game one, especially for most decks. And the thing is, right, like, Sand Instincts is not the most awkward card to main deck. Like, Soul Striker main decks it very well and naturally. I think Icarus could even main deck it well and just charge it in the matchups that you don't need it, but that is kind of like the downside of having a tech a card for a specifically difficult matchup, but have it be dead for other matchups. It can just be very, very awkward. So that can definitely just be a downside if you're looking to prep for Cell Surge in that way. And I even think that Cell Surge can deal with the sideboard hate very, very well. But this is where I think you actually have to be like a very, very well-trained and just like practice Cell Surge player to do this, because I'll just let you guys know a little story that I think is kind of funny. When we were testing for Nats, I was testing with my teammate Danny, and our other teammate Marcus was kind of watching over, and I was playing our Golden Frieza deck that I profiled on the channel that we all played for Nationals, and Danny was playing Cell Surge. We were just trying to figure the matchup out because it was more of a tough one. So we played sideboard games, and I promise you guys, 10 games in a row I had Deborah in my hand and I was not able to resolve it because of Dark Power Black Mass Sand and my inability to remove it before he was able to take my hand away. And it wasn't even like the problem of being able to remove it. It was just like, Cell Surge would just stall into like turn 3, turn 4, and then play BMS when they were ready to start taking my hand away. They wouldn't use any hand control effects until they were good and ready to, and they could play BMS on that turn, so it wouldn't give me time to remove it. And that's just one example of the way that I'm talking. Like, if you're a really good Cell Surge player, you really know how to play the deck, like Jordan Markle, for example, who got third at US Nationals with it, and whoever was the player that won one of the national events with it, that's like the type of play that can really just excel Cell Surge into that uninteractability and just like unfair gameplay, right? But one thing I do want to mention though is obviously Android 16 is one of the decks that was able to qualify for Worlds, and I wouldn't be surprised if Jared decides to play it for Worlds, because from what I've been told, he's just like super practiced with the deck. He's got to be pretty confident in it, considering that it got him to second place in Nationals. And this is one of the very few decks that actually has a positive game one Cell Surge matchup. And I'm not going to pretend to be an Android 16 expert by any means. I've not played the deck in quite some time in several formats now, but I will say from what I saw between Jared and Jordan's top 4 game at US Nats was that Android 16 is able to play very, very well without much of a hand, because on the backside you can use leader effect to combo from the drop, and then you can arrive all your different Android 16s from your energy. So you're just doing all that, putting out a massive board without much need for a hand at all. And even though Cell Surge is in green and has pretty solid spot removal, Android 16 was putting out way too many battle cards for Cell Surge to be able to deal with. So I don't want to talk like Android 16 is like the deck to pick for Worlds, because I don't really think it is. But I did just want to say that I would not be surprised if Jared decides to take it to Worlds. And it does have a pretty positive Cell Surge matchup. Again, like the player that won the Nationals with Cell Surge could be very likely that he plays it, and he might just be prepared for all the hate that might come his way in terms of like sideboard and even maybe like main deck hate. But I think like Cell Surge players, or really, really good Cell Surge players, can play around that to some degree. So I do think Cell Surge is a solid pick if you're super, super confident with it. Nextly, though, we'll talk about Gogeta Xeno, which I think on many people's radars is one of the top decks in the format. And I think Gogeta Xeno is a solid pick for Worlds. I think the deck has a very, very high ceiling and a very, very high power level. The one thing I think that Gogeta suffers in is sometimes consistency. But what I will say is we have to keep in mind Worlds is going to be a much shorter tournament, and when you have a shorter tournament, variance could be a little bit less of a factor. And what I'm talking about with variance in terms of Gogeta Xeno is like using your top 5 warp effect and just, you know, not hitting your fusion pieces or hitting a key Gogeta that you needed to draw out of your hand and actually play. So that type of variance in a much smaller tournament like this could be a lot less impactful, which could make Gogeta a much better pick. And again, I think the ceiling is very high. You're just like probably the best aggro deck in the entire format. And just like speaking on aggro really quickly, I don't expect to see any Reddit Worlds. If I see Reddit Worlds, I'm going to be very, very surprised. I just don't think that like Jiren, Red Vegeta U7, Red Gohan U7, or Red Broly, I don't think they stack up nearly as well in terms of aggro compared to Gogeta Xeno. So if you want to play an aggro pick, I definitely think Gogeta Xeno is the way to go. I think it can do well against Cell Surge, but again, against a very seasoned Cell Surge player, I've seen this matchup appear a lot more 50-50 than a lot of you guys might think, because Cell Surge does have a lot of great defensive tools at its disposal, like Boo-Po when they're above 5 life because they can't use Super Kamehameha. The Cell Surge player can smartly use a leader effect to put everything in rest mode, which can really stall Gogeta Xeno out. So I do think it's a good pick. I think the variance issue is less of a factor, again, because of the smaller size of the tournament. But I would not put Gogeta Xeno at my number 1, especially because it actually has a bad matchup, or at least a less favorable matchup against my number 1 pick, which we'll get to later. Hatchiac, I gotta mention it because it did win one of the nationals. I don't think it's the pick. I don't think it's really that great of a pick, mostly because yellow and blue could very well be the pick. Like, I still wouldn't count out Soul Striker, even though we're not going to talk about Soul Striker today too much because it didn't win one of the national events. But I would not count out Soul Striker as someone's pick for Worlds because of how versatile the deck is. And the other one we obviously have to talk about in a second is Icarus. So with those two decks being a very high likelihood of being played for nationals, you can't really account for Hatchiac, you know, like getting you through a field of like Gogeta Xeno or other random aggro decks, because there's not going to be that much of a field. There's only going to be so many decks and players in the tournament. So with that in mind, Hatchiac also struggles against blue and yellow because Hatchiac builds are usually based around SS4 Gogeta thwarting the Dark Empire, and blue can just hit it with God Sealing and totally prevent the play of it, and yellow can just have it enter rest mode so it can't use its attacking auto and then usually deal with it some other way the following turn. So that just doesn't seem like a super viable strategy going into Worlds when you expect Icarus and Soul Striker to probably be quite popular. And like I said in yesterday's video, my teammate Mike that plays Hatchiac religiously, against blue and yellow, he just becomes like a mill deck because he can't win through his natural win condition. But like at that point, why wouldn't you just play a better mill deck if you really wanted to play like that stalling type of control? Like you could just play, I don't know, Janemba, Cooler, Mill, Sin, Xeno. Those seem like better options to me than Hatchiac. So again, I did have to talk about it because it did win a nationals, but I just don't think it's the pick. Maybe you guys have different opinions. Of course, feel free to let me know in the comments. But anyways, we got to move on to Icarus because it is a deck that won the most nationals, and I think many people would slate this as the best deck in the format, which before US Nats, I don't think a lot of people expected it to be this way, especially considering it now has transitioned into a mono yellow deck. But I gotta say, guys, I do think Icarus is the number 1 pick. In yesterday's video, towards the end of it, we got into this discussion of like, if Icarus is, you know, slated as the best deck, a lot of people are probably gonna try to prepare to counter it, right? But in terms of like Cell Surge having a hard counter in the form of like Dabor Ritual at hand or Sand Instincts, which again, Cell Surge can even beat its quote-unquote hard counters, what really exists as like a hard counter to Icarus? There really isn't much. The cards are just so generically good in 99% of situations that there's nothing that just like turns off Icarus as a strategy or as a deck, right? It just doesn't exist as far as I'm aware. Like, the deck can play out of most scenarios. The fact that the deck just consistently has a 15 card hand pretty much every single game and can self-awaken and Cell Surge, which don't forget, self-awakening and Cell Surge is a huge thing because they just want to stall you at 8 and then crit you down and then just like, you know, put you to 0 eventually. But with Icarus being able to interact with his life, that's a big benefit against Cell Surge. And just amongst other things, you're able to get flipped when you want to, have a huge hand, and again, all the yellow cards are straight up gas. So even though people might be going into this tournament and thinking, how can I beat Icarus? And Icarus might have the biggest target on its back, and maybe Cell Surge is second in line with the next biggest target on its back, I just don't think that hard counter exists for Icarus unless, you know, some of these Worlds competitors know of some rogue deck that just like 10 out of 10 stomps Icarus, right? That would be the only scenario in which I can see that happening. And who knows, man, like these players are obviously on the next level. They've obviously, you know, taken this into account. They're going to be looking for the deck that beats Icarus, amongst other things. It should definitely be in their testing gauntlet. I just don't know if that deck exists, to be honest, because again, the deck is just such a good mid-range deck, able to play in pretty much all scenarios. So for me, Icarus has got to be the number 1 pick. I would probably put Cell Surge as the number 2 pick, and then maybe Soul Striker as number 3, again, just because of how versatile the deck can be. And then probably Gogeta at 4th. And then that's pretty much my top 4 for what I think are the top picks for Nats. But I'm super excited to see what these players decide to bring to the table. Let me know what you guys think is the number 1, number 2, number 3 pick for Worlds. I'm looking forward to seeing it, and I'll see you guys next time.
All right, now that you guys finished watching that video, they should have never banned fucking Child's Wish. They shouldn't. Super Shadow was the best deck in the game. Super Shadow was the best!